I left my daughter's rehearsal dinner before dessert was served. And what happened the next morning changed everything. I thought I understood about the woman. My son-in-law's family believed they were better than. I've spent a long time trying to figure out where to start this. Not because the story is complicated. It's actually pretty simple when you strip it down. But because every time I try to tell it, I end up back at my wife's kitchen curtains. The ones she made herself, from fabric she bought at the remnant table at Joann's. Cream-colored with little blue flowers. She was so proud of those curtains. Hung them the week we moved into our house in Decatur, Georgia 31 years ago, and never saw a reason to replace them. I thought about those curtains the night my son-in-law's mother looked at my wife across a candlelit table and said what she said. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My name is not important. What matters is that I am 62 years old, I have one daughter, and I have spent the better part of my adult life working in a field that does not require a tie. I wore work boots for 20 years, drove a truck that needed a new muffler every other spring. My wife, her name is June. No, wait. She goes by her middle name, always has. Her name is Bea. Beatrice on her birth certificate, Bea to everyone who actually knows her. We met when we were both 24. She was waitressing at a Waffle House outside of Marietta, and I had a job stringing cable for a telecom contractor. Neither of us had any business being proud of ourselves. We were just two people trying to keep the lights on. We did keep them on. Barely, some years. There was a January when we ate rice and canned beans for 2 weeks because the furnace went out and we had to choose. We chose heat. She never complained, not once. She heated up those beans in a pot on the stove and set the table like it was Sunday dinner. That was Bea. That has always been Bea. Our daughter Lily was born 3 years into our marriage. She was the kind of child who made you believe you'd done something right without knowing exactly what it was. Quiet, curious, driven in a way that had nothing to do with us pushing her. She got a full scholarship to Georgia Tech, then a master's degree, then a job at an engineering firm in Atlanta that had her name on a glass door office by the time she was 29. Somewhere along the way, she met Connor. I want to be fair about Connor. This story is not about Connor. Connor is a decent man. I believe that now, and I believed it then. He came from a different world than Lily did, but he never made her feel small for where she came from. He loved my daughter genuinely. I could see it in the way he looked at her when she wasn't paying attention. That soft, almost disbelieving look, like he still couldn't quite figure out how he got that lucky. His family, though. His family was a different matter entirely. Connor's father, a man named Whitmore, had made his money in commercial real estate, Atlanta, then Charlotte, then Nashville. He was not the kind of man who let you forget it. He wore it the way some men wear cologne. Too much, and you noticed it before you noticed anything else. His mother, whose name was Diane, and I will be careful here, because I promised myself I would be fair, was the kind of woman who asked questions that weren't really questions. Oh, Decatur? The older part of Decatur? Yes, the older part. The part with the small yards and the houses that needed painting every decade or so, and the neighbors who waved at you from their driveways. That Decatur. The first time Bea and I met the Whitmores, we drove up to their house in Buckhead in our 2014 Ford F-150. I watched Diane clock that truck from the front door. She smiled with her whole face, but her eyes did something else entirely. Dinner was fine, polite. The kind of polite that takes effort. Bea brought a pound cake she'd made from scratch, the recipe her mother had given her, the one with cream cheese in the batter. Diane accepted it with both hands and thanked her warmly, and I never saw that cake again. It did not appear on the dessert table. I'm not saying she threw it away. I'm just saying it was never mentioned. Whitmore, I never called him by his first name, and he never offered it as an option, asked me what I did for work. I told him I'd spent most of my career in utilities, which is true. What I left out is that by that point, I had been running my own company for 11 years. Not a big company. 12 employees, contracts with 3 county governments, a reputation I'd built call by call and job by job. I left that part out because it didn't seem relevant. Because I don't think a man's work history is something you have to prove at a dinner table. That was my first mistake, apparently. Because, from that night forward, the Whitmores made a series of assumptions about me and Bea that they never revised. They assumed we were struggling. They assumed we were, at best, lower middle-class people who had gotten lucky with a smart daughter and were now along for a ride we hadn't earned. Diane started sending Lily information about wedding budget resources. She offered twice to help cover the difference for whatever the reception venue cost, in case we needed it. Lily turned her down both times and didn't tell me about it until much later. I found out because of the seating chart. 4 weeks before the wedding, Lily came over for Sunday dinner, and she was quiet in a way that meant something was wrong. Bea noticed it first. She always does. After we ate, after I'd cleared the plates, Lily sat at the kitchen table with both hands wrapped around a coffee mug, and she told us about the seating arrangement. The Whitmores had taken over most of the wedding planning. Not aggressively, more like water finding cracks. One small decision at a time. The venue was their suggestion. The caterer was their caterer. The florist was someone Diane had a relationship with. Lily had gone along with most of it because she's practical, and the Whitmores were offering to pay for the things they were steering, and fighting over hydrangeas versus peonies wasn't worth it to her. But the seating chart was different. Bea and I had been placed at table 14. I didn't know the significance of that until Lily pulled up the floor plan on her phone and showed me. Table 14 was near the back, near the service entrance. It was the table where the Whitmores had placed their contractor, their housekeeper's husband, a distant cousin from Connor's side who was apparently coming in from out of town and didn't know anyone. They had put us at the table with the people they considered peripheral. Lily showed it to me with her eyes already sorry. She hadn't agreed to it. She had only just seen the draft herself. She said she was going to say something to Connor, that she'd fix it. I told her not to. Bea looked at me across the table and I looked back at her, and we made the kind of decision that doesn't require words. Don't fight about the seating chart, I said. It's fine. It's not fine, Lily said. I know, I said. But it'll be fine. What I meant was, let it play out. I have always believed that people who think they're better than you will eventually say so out loud, given enough room. You don't have to do anything. You just have to be patient. The rehearsal dinner was held at a restaurant in Midtown that I'd been to once before, years ago, for a work lunch. Good food. Nice room. The Whitmores had reserved the private dining room in the back, and when Bea and I walked in, Diane was already there, working the room in a black dress that had probably cost more than our first car. She greeted us warmly. That's the thing I keep coming back to. She greeted us warmly every single time, right up until she didn't. We were seated, introductions were made, wine was poured. I had one glass. I don't drink much. Bea had sparkling water. She doesn't drink at all, hasn't since Lily was born. Just a personal choice she made and never made a big deal about. Diane noticed the sparkling water and said, in that tone of hers, "Oh, are you not drinking? Is everything all right?" Like abstaining from wine was a symptom of something. Bea smiled. "I just prefer water," she said. Simple, clear. And then she turned to the woman on her left and asked about her flight in from Savannah, because that's who Bea is. She makes other people comfortable. She's done it her whole life without noticing. The dinner went on. Toasts were made. Connor's best man told a story about a camping trip. Lily laughed and held Connor's hand and looked the way she always looks when she's genuinely happy, which is a little surprised, like happiness is still something she's not entirely used to. I watched her and felt the specific fullness that I imagine every father feels at some point if he's lucky. This sense that something you helped build has become its own thing entirely. Bigger than you, better than you, and that's exactly right. Then Whitmore stood up and made a toast. It was a good toast, mostly. He talked about Connor growing up, about the values they'd tried to instill. He said something about how family was everything, how the people around this table would be family now. He said he hoped the new family they were forming would be one of strength and character. Then he looked at me and said, "We're glad to have all kinds of people joining this family, all kinds of people." He raised his glass. He smiled. I raised mine. Bea didn't move for just a second, a half second. Nobody else would have noticed. I noticed. After dinner, after most people had broken into smaller conversations and the dessert plates had been cleared, I stepped out to get some air. The restaurant had a small courtyard off the side entrance. I stood there for a few minutes, just breathing, looking at the string lights someone had put up along the fence. Whitmore came out a few minutes later. I don't know if he followed me or if it was coincidence. He stood next to me and lit a cigarette. I hadn't known he smoked, and for a while neither of us said anything. Then he said, "Connor tells me you run some kind of business." "I do," I said. "What kind?" "Utilities infrastructure. Maintenance contracts mostly." He nodded slowly. "Small operation? 12 people," I said. "We do all right." He took a drag on his cigarette. "That's good," he said. "That's respectable." and the way he said respectable made it sound like the opposite of what the word means. I went back inside. The next morning was a Saturday. The wedding was Sunday. Lily had wanted a low-key morning, just the immediate family, a late breakfast at our house before everyone went their separate ways to get ready. Bia made biscuits and a sausage gravy that she's been making the same way for 30 years. We had scrambled eggs, bacon, sliced tomatoes from the garden, fresh squeezed orange juice because Lily loves it and it was her weekend. The Whitmores arrived 20 minutes late, and Diane walked in and looked around the kitchen the way a building inspector looks at a house. She didn't say anything critical. She didn't have to. There was a particular quality to her silence when she looked at Bea's curtains. Those curtains, cream-colored blue flowers, homemade, 31 years old. Connor ate 2 helpings of biscuits and gravy and told Bia it was the best thing he'd ever eaten. I liked him for that. I still do. Whitmore sat at the end of the table and checked his phone. He had coffee. He didn't eat. Diane had fruit and yogurt she'd brought herself in a small container from wherever she was staying. She set it on our kitchen table next to Bea's biscuits and opened it without asking and ate it with a spoon she'd also brought. Her own spoon. I have thought about that spoon many times since. At some point the conversation turned to the wedding, which was natural enough. Diane started talking about the venue, the flowers, how the centerpieces had turned out, how the lighting was going to be perfect. She was enthusiastic in a way that made it clear. She considered the wedding primarily her production. She said I decided, and I chose, and I arranged, more than she said anything else. Then she said, and I am going to try to get this right, because I've replayed it enough times, she said. I think what I'm most proud of is that we managed to pull together something really elegant. Something that reflects well on the family, on both families. And then she paused, and she looked at Bia and she said, though I'll be honest, I was a little worried at first. About the optics. You know how people talk. Bea looked at her. What do you mean? She asked. Genuinely, she actually wanted to know. Diane smiled with practiced warmth. Well, you know, different backgrounds, different. She made a small gesture with her hand, a wave, like she was indicating something in the air between them. Different levels, people noticed those things. The table went quiet. Lily's face did something I had never seen it do. Her jaw didn't drop. Her eyes didn't go wide. She just went very, very still. Like every system in her body had paused to process what had just happened. Connor said, Mom, I'm not saying anything bad, Diane said quickly. I'm just being honest. From different places, that's just a fact. Different levels, Bia said. She said it quietly, not a question, not an accusation. Just repeating the words back, like she was checking to make sure she'd heard them correctly. I didn't mean it like that, Diane said. How did you mean it? Bia asked. Silence. And then Diane did the thing that finished it. She looked at Whitmore. Just a glance, quick, sideways, and he looked back at her, and something passed between them that had clearly been said before in private, in their house, at their kitchen table, that did not have cream curtains with blue flowers. Something they had agreed on a long time ago. Then Diane looked at me and said, in a voice that was almost kind, almost gentle, the way you'd talk to someone who doesn't quite understand, we just want Connor to be proud of where he comes from. Of who his people are, you understand, who his people are. I put my coffee mug down. I did it slowly. I set it on the table, and I sat up straight, and I looked at Diane Whitmore and I said, I'd like you to leave my house now. She blinked. Excuse me? I'd like you to leave, I said again. Both of you, please. Whitmore's face changed. Now hold on, there's no holding on, I said. You came into my home, sat at my table, ate your own food that you brought because apparently mine wasn't suitable, and then told my wife that she is a lower class of person than you are. In her own kitchen, in front of her daughter. The day before her daughter's wedding, I stopped. I took a breath. I'd like you to leave. Connor was looking at his plate. Lily was looking at me. Her eyes were bright. Diane stood up. She wasn't flustered. I'll give her that. She had the composure of someone who had never expected to be told to leave anywhere and was reordering the situation internally in real time. She picked up her yogurt container. She picked up her spoon. She said, I see. I hope you do. I said. They left. Whitmore barely said a word. At the door, he turned back and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Not angry, exactly. Something more complicated. Like he was seeing something he hadn't expected to see and wasn't sure what to do with it. The door closed. Lily made a sound, half law, half something else, and pressed her hand over her mouth. Connor looked up finally and said, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. He said it to Bia. He said it twice. Bea reached over and patted his hand. You didn't do anything wrong, she said. Eat your biscuits. He laughed. It sounded a little broken. He ate the biscuits. I went outside and sat on the back steps and looked at the garden for a while. Bea came out after a few minutes and sat next to me. We didn't say much. We've been married long enough that we don't always have to. You okay? She asked. I'm fine, I said. You? She thought about it. Yeah, she said. I actually am. That was Saturday morning. What happened next is the part I struggled with. Because what happened next required me to do something I had never done in 40 years of working life. I had to make a phone call that I'd been avoiding making for almost a decade. There's a man I know. I'll call him by his first name only, which is Arthur. Arthur and I grew up on the same street in Decatur. Same street, 4 houses down. We were not close as kids. He was 3 years older, but we stayed in each other's peripheral vision the way people from the same block sometimes do. He went into real estate. I went into utilities. We both built things quietly, without fanfare, and we had lunch twice a year at the same diner off Memorial Drive, and talked about the Braves and didn't ask each other for favors. He knew, though. He had known for years what my company had quietly become. Because I had not been running a 12-person utilities maintenance operation for the past 4 years. I had sold that business in 2021 for considerably more than it sounds, and what I had been doing since then was different. Investing, mostly. Backing infrastructure projects. A water reclamation initiative in 3 counties south of Atlanta that had my fingerprints on it, but not my name. I am not a billionaire, I want to be honest about that, but I am comfortable in a way that Diane Whitmore, with her yogurt and her spoon, had looked at my kitchen curtains and fundamentally failed to understand. I had never told anyone that, not the Whitmores, obviously. Not even Connor, who knew only that Lily's father had done well with a small business. The reason I hadn't said anything is the same reason Bea still has those curtains, because the curtains are ours. Because we made something from nothing and we don't need anyone's approval of it. And the moment you start telling people what you're worth, you've handed them something they can use against you. But I made the phone call to Arthur that Saturday afternoon, not to brag, not to wave anything in anyone's face. I called him because his firm had just closed on a commercial development in Buckhead. I'd seen it in the Atlanta Business Chronicle, and that development happened to include a mixed-use parcel that was formerly owned by Whitmore's real estate group. A parcel Whitmore had reportedly been trying to reacquire for 2 years because of a contract dispute that had gone sideways. I called Arthur and I said, "Tell me about the Buckhead parcel." He told me, and then I made a decision, not out of anger. I want to be clear about that. I was not angry. I was something quieter and more settled than anger. I was decided. I told Arthur to proceed with the development as planned, but that I wanted to increase my stake in the project, which I did, significantly, which meant that the parcel Whitmore had been trying to claw back was no longer available to him through any avenue he had access to, because the investor group had closed, and I was now a meaningful part of it. That's all. That's the whole thing. I did not ruin the man. I did not call his business partners or his lender. I simply stepped into a space that was already open and made a decision about where my money would go, the way I have always made decisions about where my money goes. Arthur asked me why. I said, it just felt like the right time. The wedding happened Sunday. It was beautiful. The lighting was exactly as Diane had promised, even though she spent most of the evening at a table near the front, with her jaw held in a particular position. Whitmore shook my hand at the reception. Long handshake. Firm. He looked at me differently than he had before. Not warmly, but differently. Like he was recalibrating something. Connor and Lily danced their first dance to a song she'd picked. Something quiet. Not the kind of song you recognize right away. The kind that sounds like it was written for exactly one specific moment in one specific life. And I sat at my table and watched my daughter's face and thought about the first time I ever held her. 2 hours old, wrapped in a yellow blanket, the tiniest person I had ever seen, I danced with Bea twice. She's a better dancer than I am, always has been. At some point her sister came over, and they got into a conversation about something I couldn't follow, and I stood at the edge of the dance floor and watched the room. Diane found me there. I'll give her credit. She came to me, I didn't go to her. She stood next to me for a moment without saying anything, and then she said, "I owe your wife an apology." "Yes," I said, "you do." "I'll give her one," she said. "I know you will," I said. She looked at me. "Arthur Fleming mentioned your name today," she said. "He called Whitmore about the Buckhead project." I nodded. "How long have you?" She stopped. "A while," I said. She was quiet for a moment. The music changed. Something faster. Younger people moved toward the dance floor. You never said anything, she said. It didn't come up, I said. She looked at me for a long time. Something moved through her expression that I didn't try to name. Then she said, I made assumptions. You did, I had. I'm sorry. I looked at her. I thought about what I wanted to say. I had been thinking about it in a way for months, maybe longer. And what I came to, standing there at the edge of my daughter's wedding reception, in a venue that Diane had chosen and decorated and arranged perfectly, was this. What I need you to understand, I said, is that the apology that matters is the one you give my wife, not because of anything about me or my business or the Buckhead project, but because she sat in her own kitchen and you made her feel like less. That's what needs to be corrected. Diane nodded. She didn't say anything else. She walked across the room and she found Bea near the dessert table, and they talked for several minutes. I couldn't hear what was said. I watched Bea's face. At one point she nodded. At one point she put her hand briefly on Diane's arm. That was enough. That was exactly enough. Later, driving home, just the two of us, Lily and Connor long gone to their hotel, the highway empty at midnight. Bea was quiet for a while, and then she said, Arthur Fleming called Whitmore today, I heard. Was that you? Indirectly, I said. She looked out the window. The lights of the city slid past. After a while, she said, The curtains. What about them? I should probably replace them, she said. I thought about it. They're your curtains, I said. She turned back to the window. Yeah, she said. They are. We drove the rest of the way home in the comfortable silence of two people who have been through enough together that the quiet doesn't need to be filled. I pulled into the driveway and cut the engine, and we sat there for a moment, the way you do sometimes, not ready to go in yet. She meant it when she apologized, Bea said finally. I could tell. I know, I said. It doesn't fix it, she said. No, I said. It doesn't. It's something, I agreed. She opened the car door and the dome light came on, and she looked over at me in that light, 60 years old, in the blue dress she'd bought for the wedding, and she looked exactly like herself. Not the woman I thought I married, the actual woman, the one who warmed up canned beans and set the table like it was Sunday dinner, and hung cream curtains with blue flowers in her kitchen, and never once asked anyone's permission to be proud of them. I got out of the car and went around and held the door for her, the way I have done since our first date in 1988 outside a movie theater in Marietta. She took my hand. We went inside.